2022. Order. Let's stand for the Pledge of Allegiance.
I think you're right, I think I turned it off.
I
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
And you want to do roll call?
Chairman Keys. Chairman
Yes.
Keys. Vice Chair Pittman.
Here.
Commissioner Elwood.
Here.
Commissioner Graves.
Here,
Commissioner Mills.
Here.
Secretary Dumas here. All present.
Okay, I will declare a quorum. Do I have a motion to approve the agenda?
The motion we approve the agenda is submitted.
Ken made a motion to approve the agenda. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Linda seconded it. Any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Agenda is approved. Lynn distributed meetings from the public hearing of August 10th and the regular meeting of August 10th. Do I have a motion to approve the minutes?
I'll move to approve the minutes of the public hearing and the regular meeting on August 10th.
Linda made a motion. Do I have a second?
Second.
Jerry seconded it. Any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Minutes are approved. We have no reports at this time, so I'm going to turn the meeting over to Lynn for new business.
Okay, we have forms that are called for in the planning and zoning regulations that the city adopted last week. And I prepared draft versions of those that I put out on the web for people to get to and look at. So the first one we're going to look at is the conditional use application. And that, I guess my intent for, let's really keep it back, isn't it? My intent for going through this was just to see if you folks saw any errors that I've made. I spent some late night hours doing this instead of doing it in the early morning with coffee.
You're gonna go through them one by one?
Yeah, I'm just gonna call them up and see if we need to make any changes. Did anyone find any changes on the form itself, on the information that we need? No?
I did not.
Conditional use. How do you figure out what the existing use is?
By looking at the current zoning.
So whatever the zoning is, you just say residential one manufactured, and that's the existing use?
That would be my intent for
You
my
don't go
home.
into a deeper level of detail or anything?
Well, I put that on there, existing use, anticipating that it would be compliant, but if it was non-conforming, at least it would show that, you know, I'm using it for a bakery and it's zoned residential. You know, if there's some non-conforming issue, it would show up in that box. So how it's currently being used.
What if it's zoned commercial and it's a residence right now? And
That's
a
what they would-
non-conforming use?
That's
as a
what they'd be
residence.
filling in.
Huh?
They'd be filling that in. Fill in how it's being currently used, whatever that is.
So it would be the informal description
Yeah.
of their own making, not
Sure.
something listed in code as
Yeah.
some non-conforming thing.
I would agree, yeah.
Okay.
That would be sufficient.
And the current zoning would be how it's defined, how their unit block lot is defined in the UBL
Yes.
table?
Yes,
Okay.
that was my intent to get that information.
What is project name?
In case someone was deciding to create a thing that's going to cover multiple properties.
Like a
they might-
developer?
Yeah, they might give it a name, like
Stone Oaks or something?
Timberwood neighborhood or something.
Timberwood, okay,
Yeah,
okay. So it's whatever they have chosen to call it, if they chose, but if it's somebody with just a residence and they want to put a non-conforming something or other on there, they wouldn't need a project name, I guess, right? Okay. Okay,
and the intent is fill in the blanks where you can, and if it doesn't apply, then it stays blank. And whoever is going to receive this has to decide, is there enough information to make it complete?
okay, okay.
So there's a couple things at the bottom. Rather than having a certified letter or a separate document, there's places for signatures of if there's a representative for the person bringing the application, and there's certainly one for the owner that it says, I certify under penalty of perjury. So it just makes the documents official, so that we have an official signature. I don't know how we would verify the right person signed it, but that's what the form calls for.
So what kind of person would a representative be?
The builder might represent the owner
Okay,
in filling out the application, doing the work.
okay.
Okay. On the second page then are the document, go ahead.
Then, question under penalty of perjury. What if somebody does falsify this document? Then what? What criminal statute do they violate?
Well, I assumed, because I've taken this from Tonto County, that the penalty and the perjury would happen if I, the owner, had been wronged by someone else. Someone stole my identity, if you will. That it would give them some document that say under penalty of perjury, you signed this erroneously.
Oh.
Okay.
They'd help them, help the property owner in court.
We can take them to Conditional Use Application.
There you go.
All right.
I used the Tonto Town forms because we modeled our regs after them, so I thought it'd be a good source, and they appear to be easy to change.
Okay.
With one exception. Okay. Yes.
Are we going to this next page then?
Yes.
Okay.
So on the second page is a list of things that need to be done to make the application complete. And number one is the application with a fee. And then copies of the warranty deed. There's some instruction there how you might get one if you don't have one, trying to help them. I think we need to ask the person who's asking for conditional use to provide a copy of the covenant. And I think it'd be important that they may have a version that's dated prior to the current one, or they may have one that's newer than the one we have. So I thought that'd be good to have a copy of the covenant. The question is,
Although the declaration of reservations may not be the legal controlling document when we consider whether we would grant a variance or a conditional use or not.
that's,
Our ordinance would be the controlling legal document.
I would agree. And then the narrative, depending on the type of application they're making, there would be questions that they could answer by covering A through H in their narrative, in their statement of why they're asking for a conditional use. And that's the kind of information that the Planning Commission will need to consider in making its decision whether to grant the application or not. Photographs may or may not be appropriate, and they may be helpful, so I think it would be good. And then the site plan drawn to scale.
So the only thing I saw kind of missing in the list was signage. Is that, I mean, since we do have some ordinance on signing, I think it's even in the regulations, it's one of the
Signage, you mean?
signage.
Yeah, the regulation has procedures on when they get posted and how they get
No,
posted.
not that signage, but like you said, planned outdoor lighting changes was the last thing on this list. What about planned signage?
Oh,
Would that be
Oh, I see.
pertinent at all?
Or if it's a subdivision like Timberwood Heights.
okay, you're suggesting that there's a planned signage.
I just wondered if that would also be something you might want
I think that'd
covered
be
in a
good.
narrative.
Problem with that?
Because it's in the regulations, I
Yeah.
think, one of the subjects we haven't touched on yet.
Okay, I'll add that.
Okay.
Okay. And then the process map, as I went through our regulations, tried to do the best I could to detail all the steps that have to happen and the alternative routes of how the process can go. I added notes in there for where I found in the reg where that statement by putting those numbers. Number 1203A2 is the paragraph in the regulation to help guide us. If there's a question, and I guess it didn't say it on this form, but I guess it's imperative that the form isn't the controlling document, the regs are.
Mhm.
Because not every piece of what you have to do is included in this little map.
I really like the fact that you went ahead and added the section of code. That was,
It'll help
Good
us.
idea.
It'll help us and the public.
yeah. On this chart, the third line of boxes,
Okay.
It says following the HICPC meeting in the left box and the right box.
Mhm.
And wouldn't that be in the HICPC meeting?
We have a public hearing and the meeting follows immediately after. They're two separate agendas with two separate purposes. So I call it a meeting.
But I'm thinking you're actually tabling the application in the meeting, not following the application, right?
Oh, I see what you're saying. So in the meeting or during the meeting?
During the
or
meeting.
Rather than following?
Yeah, following suggests you're doing something outside the meeting.
Oh, okay.
I mean,
All
to
right.
me.
All right. I can change it to during. Okay. And just trying to stick this all into this size space, it would have been easier to see if I would have drafted together like some of the other examples, pulling those into a decision loop, but.
And under that leftmost box that you just changed,
Okay.
it says special HICPC meeting.
Mhm.
Why is that not a regular meeting?
The text says a special meeting will be held.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
Okay.
and I think it's all about timeliness, so you're not delaying it another
I
month.
see. Okay.
Now these conditional use is saying, you know, change what the property is currently being used to some point. So when we go from a private home to a B&B or Airbnb, we have a conditional use application for each one of those.
I don't remember the chart that says for short-term rentals if it's permitted or it's conditional, whatever the reg has in it. I can look that up. If it requires a conditional, if our chart of uses says in this zone it's conditional, then they need to fill out an application and come to the board to get permission in case there's additional conditions that need to be added to the permission. Conditional use could also be, I want to put this building 3 foot across the easement.
Short-term is conditional for all categories of residential.
Okay, so to answer your question, it's conditional, so they would have to do this. So they would have to change, they'd have to fill out a conditional use application and bring it to the planning commission to turn their residence into a short-term rental. That's in the regs.
Mm-hmm. Or a B&B.
I think over time, we're gonna have to gain an understanding of what goes before the Board of Zoning Adjustment, and what goes before the Planning Commission. Because, you know, you're saying that infringing on an easement would be a conditional use change that would go before the Planning Commission, and I'm thinking that would be a variance that the Zoning Board of Adjustment would consider.
Okay.
Because you're not really using the property, you know.
Or you're using it differently than the ordinance says.
Variance.
You're looking for a variance.
And why have a Zoning Board of Adjustment? Because any kind of deviation from an ordinance would fall into that same category. When I think of uses, I think of things like, it's not going to be residential, it's going to be R2 residential, or it's not going to be C1, it's going to be L1, or
That's
something
a
like
zoning
that.
change.
That's the zones.
That's a zoning change.
Yeah.
There are uses within the zones. That's the way I understand it. I mean, if you go back to the table, where it has all the zones for residential, and then it has a whole list of all these kinds of uses that could be in there, it could be permitted in there, not permitted in there, or maybe permitted if we allow it.
I tend to agree with Dan that variances probably need a different process, because I can see variances being the majority of the conditional uses.
Are you talking about a variance being something other than a
Well,
conditional use?
I'm thinking about, if we get, I don't know how many you're gonna get a month, but if we have to have a special meeting on all variances, whether, you know, a guy can build his fence 2 inches closer to the property.
That's different.
Well, Dan just brought that up, that's a variance.
It's not a conditional use though.
The confusion is my confusion. What, that kind of a variance where we're gonna build next to an easement, is that a Board of Zoning Adjustment or a Planning Commission issue? Right? Is that what we're trying to decide?
In my mind, that was for the zoning board of adjustment, because it's a call they could make. They're not really rezoning anything, they're just, you know, making a minor concession.
Can you find that section of zoning board of adjustment?
Yeah, it's in 28.
28. There's the variance chart, right? What are you talking about? You're talking about this kind of variance here?
Yes, variance to those dimensions, those placements.
To me, that's something different than conditional use.
Okay, so the question is which board sees it, Planning Commission or the BOZA?
Well, what did the regulations
That's
say?
what I'm
If we could
trying to
find
find
that
that,
paragraph, right? Someplace referred to Appendix 07-02.
No? I can investigate that question and see if I can define that in a chart, a list of conditions or a list of,
Yeah, I think
a list
so.
of events.
Examples of the type of thing that would go before the zoning board of adjustment and the planning commission, there's not necessarily a hierarchy that one is a higher, you know, court of appeal than the other, but in my mind, it kind of is that way. That the zoning board of adjustment is kind of like your first level of sorting out whether something is permissible or not. Yeah. If somebody just needs a minor deviation in order to be able to, you know, let's say they're building an R1 structure on an R1 lot, but they, you know, because there's a big ditch running down here, they gotta be, you know, they can't honor the 15 feet. They have to be, you know, 6 feet on one side and the rest on the other side. You know, I think the zoning board of adjustment could grant that kind of variance. But if somebody wanted to come in, and this is an extreme, if somebody wanted to come in and buy, you know, 20 adjacent R1 residential lots and build a, you know, an apartment complex, you know, that would be an R3, that would have to come before the planning commission, because you're not using the property as it was zoned.
I think it sounds like in 2603 that may be the
Yes.
what
In
the
B1.
what the BOZA does.
Yeah, and what you just said, Dan, I think is right here in 2603 B1. The applicant demonstrates that special conditions and circumstances exist to the land, structure, building. I think that's the text, so I was wrong when I said to place a building in the easement.
And there's you know, all these sections from 2100, 2100 on down seem to be applicable to the BOZA, like driveways, multifamily non-residential uses, corner visibility, residential compatibility.
You said the one
fences,
of multifamily.
sidewalks, street frontage,
Read the one you said about family.
driveways and access, multifamily and non-residential uses.
See,
There's
I
some
would think that
standards
would
for
be a-
driveways.
That would be a land use, that would go before the planning commission, I would think. If you change it, you want to do a multifamily and R1.
Well, yeah,
No, I
no,
don't
this
think
is
that's
just
what
the
it's-
driveway. This is just about the
Yeah, it's
driveway
just about the driveway.
and
Okay.
access.
If it is multi-family, but the driveway doesn't, can't fit the standard.
I mean, I think having a multifamily residence is in the uses or in the zoning or the districts or something. Yeah, the districts. So,
I would look for that, a model to help us guide what other cities have done. So we make a swipe at doing it right.
yeah,
Okay.
Okay.
The next form then is the path that if a board of zoning adjustment needs to consider an appeal. Appeals are made by applicants for conditional use or others, and it might say the code inspector told them that you can't do that, and they have to come to the board of zoning adjustment for an interpretation or a word. So the information required on the front page is a little bit different because of the nature of the application. Any comments or changes for that?
no, and notice on this one, it says, what code section are you requesting a variance from?
Right.
So, and those are those sections that were at the end, right before this table of 702.
Whatever conflict that they're finding,
Yeah.
okay? All right, then the process or the contents of the application are pretty much the same as we had before. The narrative is expanded. And again, these are things that the Board of Zoning Adjustment is supposed to consider before it grants or denies an application, or an appeal rather. It's small. Any suggestions or changes? Okay. The process then for going through that is on the next page. It's a simpler process because the path is shorter. The blank that I need filled in though, we haven't, don't have a Board of Zoning Adjustment formally established yet with membership, haven't had a meeting, but can we offer guidance for the bullet of when they're gonna hold their hearings on a regular basis? The state statute says they should meet regularly. So there should be a plan for having a meeting, and you do that so that you know when the deadlines are set for notifications. You can't be ad hoc, shouldn't be ad hoc. We have the second Tuesday of each month is HICPC, and then the third Tuesday is the City Council.
I would suggest that we wait until we appoint the board members and then
Okay.
let them organize themselves as far as what suits their schedule.
Okay. Is it okay if we recommend they meet in the evening? Because they're having hearings is what they're having for the public. Okay. So just don't know what day of the week then. Okay, I can stay open until we get that formed. I tried to graph this one, this center section here about what the applicant does. There's three things the applicant has to do. They all have to occur. I didn't know how to tie those together formally in a process map, but if this works, it works for me.
Lynn, in that first box,
Okay.
Says, completed application to city recorder treasurer prior to deadline of no more than 30 days following a decision of the planning administrator.
Okay.
I don't think a planning administrator is responsible for a decision.
The planning administrator is our building inspector, or someone that is saying you can or can't do a certain thing.
Oh, okay.
So when they make that decision and tell the applicant of whatever, their building permit or whatever, you can't do it
So they, in
because-
other words, he declined the building permit
Right.
on that basis?
Right.
Okay, okay.
And so
I
they
don't
have to
know, I'm
make an
confused
appeal.
by the word planning administrator. Why can't we say building inspector?
We had that originally, and our attorney said we need to change that, so it depends, it can be multiple people in the same office making decisions.
Well, that's awfully vague, isn't it?
Well,
It's sufficiently vague that you don't have to change the ordinance and.
right, or expand the ordinance to cover all your situations.
Okay, okay, I'll go with it.
Yeah, he recommended we call it the planning administrator.
Okay.
For whatever title we give them. Because the building inspector is the one that's administering our ordinance.
How come it goes to the recorder treasurer instead of the CPC secretary?
That's what our statute says, our
Okay.
ordinance says that.
Oh, okay,
I think we decided that so that the city knew what was going on.
okay, great.
You know, I think it was also a conversation with, well, he's the one that has to collect the fee.
Yeah, I think you're right.
Okay.
Now that you mentioned that, yeah.
So the
That
fee goes to
sounds
him, he
reasonable.
gets the fee, and then the paperwork goes on to the next step.
Yeah,
And the
definitely.
recorder treasurer is technically
Well, then-
the official city clerk.
If it's because if it's partially because he's collecting the fee, why don't we have it, the conditional use one that requires a fee? Doesn't that require a fee too?
It does.
Why don't we have all these submitted to him then?
I can add that. Well, we would have to change the regulation. I can put it on the process map for guidance. The completed application in the checklist, bullet number 2 is a fee is required.
Yeah,
So,
I mean, in that he really has the keys to the lockbox with the money in it.
right, and the receipts.
And collects checks and deposits of checks and things
Right.
like that. Now, that would make a lot more sense so that
Okay.
something doesn't get lost.
I'll put that in the step. Okay. All right. And at the very end of both of these that we've looked at so far, if those decisions are appealed, they end up in the Circuit Court of Carroll County if the applicant chooses to pursue it.
So, even though this is the flow chart for the Board of Zoning Adjustment, the Planning Commission Secretary still handles the public hearing notices and things like that?
That was the plan. That's what we talked about in setting the regulation.
Works for me.
That way we have one person trained and qualified or whatever to get the newspaper notified properly. If the Board of Zoning Adjustment becomes more than 3 members, you might change the regulation. Okay. Then the rezoning application, this is one I fussed with the most. Not in the application itself, but in the process map. In rezoning, in our regulations, there's 2 sections. There's changes to the text that could change the regulation, and then there's changes that property owners want to make to the use of their property or their borders or that kind of thing. So I got sideways reading through the text and trying to document all the steps, and I had twice as many boxes in the process map before I got done and realized it's because we got an outlining problem, and I'll cover that in a little bit. So the content that we have here is a little bit different than the other because it has to do with changes to the ordinances or boundaries or zoning use.
So text would change it for everybody, not just the applicant.
Yes, and
That's kind of major stuff. Yeah.
we'll see it when I get to that point, but the regulation says the text changes can come from the city council, from the commission members, or from the mayor, and that process is very short.
And how would it affect, how is it affecting a boundary change?
If someone wants to incorporate 2 lots, if someone wants to, I guess that's it. It'd be replatting and replotting of lots.
Oh,
Be
it's
boundary
not,
changes.
it's not a boundary of what's where you've drawn a boundary around all of the R stuff, R1.
It could be that
something.
boundary too. It could take that.
That's how I read boundary.
Yeah, it could be that change as well, to extend this use into another area. It's a
But
change.
replatting could be just combining 2 units like in the table, we'd make that into 1 unit in the table, for instance. You'd do a
Yes.
table.
If that was asked for and approved.
I don't mean the word unit, I mean, change 2 lots to be 1 lot.
Yeah, 1 lot.
But it wouldn't necessarily just be boundary changes, right? Because
Right.
let's say I bought because this is a real world situation, let's say I bought unit 215 up in the park, and it was zoned C1 commercial, but I want to put in a light manufacturing plant in there. I want it rezoned to L1. That would come under this.
That's correct. There'd be a change in the zoning.
Mm-hmm.
So again, on
It's real
the
good.
documents, go ahead.
That exact scenario happened with the guy that was doing the furniture, light manufacturing.
Yeah.
How did they, the previous planning commission didn't?
No, the short answer is no, nothing. Back in that day, it was basically still, Tom would decide what he was gonna allow up there, and that's what happened.
Oops. So the application requirements require different documents and different narrative.
But as a follow-up comment, we're.
Want to add the
tail end of
signage
this
on
meeting,
the narrative there?
A real life, right now situation where there's a piece of property up there that there was no covenant written for it or anything. Tom just sold it. And now the guy wants to build something on it, and he wants to know what all the rules are. Well, we didn't write any rules yet. So how are we going to write rules?
Linda suggested in the narrative I add a plan and signage as well, so I'll do that. Okay, we can move on. So the process to get there starts in this corner, and I probably should add, involve the recorder, treasurer.
Is there a fee required here
Yes.
too?
Yes.
Okay.
Add that in, and it starts in that corner. There's a deadline for publication, and that deadline for publication is on Wednesday, so it can be in the newspaper that we publish in the following Tuesday. That's what extends all this time. That's why it takes so many days to get it done.
Yeah.
So it ends up being in the paper for more than 15 days because of the publication date.
Have you checked with the state or whatever if electronic publishing on the newspaper's website?
The last I saw is the municipal league is working on getting that legislation changed. That's one of their points that they are trying to do in this next session. And the publication, what do they call it? The Arkansas, no, the newspaper community, what are they called? The Press Association. Yeah, the Press Association is fighting it, obviously. So,
Well, that may or may not be so now because the majority of newspaper readers and those that want all the news are subscribing to online edition.
so in this center section here, there are still 3 things that the applicant has to do in a timely manner. And then the public hearing happens, and then a decision can be made either to approve it or table it. And if it's approved, then it goes to a resolution that the HICPC makes to the city council. And then it goes to city council to consider the rezoning change. And if they approve the change, then it has to go to the city attorney to write the ordinance. And it's probably because of all the boundary changes that I've seen, the examples I've seen in the paper, it does the, what's the term when you describe the boundary of a property? The points? There's a name for that. When you describe it, goes 40 feet this way and 20 feet that way. And
Yeah. It's how Dan had to write our boundary.
yeah.
I didn't.
Well, somebody did.
GIS did that.
GIS wrote those descriptions.
Yeah.
Yes, I did.
So the city attorney has to write that ordinance. We have to make sure the content is right. And then we have a council meeting to approve the ordinance, I would assume. I did have an arrow in there to roll it back to the attorney if the council found an issue with it, but I think that's a given. If we don't approve it, it goes back to the council or back to the attorney to fix it without putting another loop in there. But the process, if any along the way is denied, then it's a little bit different. The statute going back up to the decision where the applicants work on it, the hearing happens at the planning commission level, and if they deny it, then there may or may not be an appeal filed within 15 days. And it goes directly then to the city council. If the appeal says, yeah, we'll go ahead with it, but it has to get to the attorney before we approve it, so. And in between time, I didn't know how to illustrate, I ran out of room. There'll have to be newspaper notifications.
Wow.
Because it's another appeal. It's another public hearing, I think. So, rezoning is something that we as a community don't take lightly, and it's something everyone has to be serious about. They're gonna get into the path of trying to get something rezoned. Unless it's a simple text change, which might be easier to do. So I think, the advice I would give is, this is my draft. I've done the best that I can, and I think we have to maybe walk through a real life scenario. Does it work? Make sure, to test it in real life. That's been my experience in manufacturing. You do your best to put it on paper and see if it works. Give the map, get you where you need to be. Okay.
I think you did an excellent job doing this, Lynn. This is
Yep, I
amazing.
agree.
Thank you for that. Next document that's in the zoning regs is a garage sale permit. And the regs are there, or I posted in the terms and conditions in that reg, that document, what the conditions are. And simply so we can keep track of the number of garage sales that occur at a certain location. The intent when we did the zoning was to ensure that we don't have someone with a perpetual garage sale going on in their property. So we have, the only way to do that, to regulate that, is to keep track, and that's what this form does. If I wanted to have one next month, I'd come in and fill out the date and put my name on it, my phone number for contact and where it's at, and then agree to the terms that I would only have 4 a year. A maximum of 4 a year. And my signs aren't out of whack, but they're only 9 square feet. That's a 3x3 sign. That's a pretty good sized sign. Or a 2x4 sign would be 8 square feet.
So we were kind of specific in saying garage sales, but I wonder if in the ordinance itself we were, did we expand that to include estate sales and white elephant sales and anything else they might want to call it, that in order to dodge the fact that it's, that it falls under this ordinance?
I'll answer it with, I've read someplace, and I don't know if it's our regs or in the definitions, that the white elephant sales that are conducted by an organization are exempt from this requirement. And an estate sale.
Normally, you wouldn't have an estate sale every weekend.
No, but you know, I'm saying the scenario might be, I've already had 4 garage sales getting ready for the estate sale, you know, so this would be the 5th one. Probably not likely going to happen, but I don't recall them. So I'd have to look to see if the exemption for the community projects that happen, if they're exempt from this application process.
Auxiliary does 2 a year.
And
I'm not too worried about.
trust me, we would want to do more than 2.
Yeah, I'm not really worried about, organizations like that, but, you know.
But you kind
As
of
soon as we
defined it in
pass-
this first line
As
here.
soon as we pass a regulation or an ordinance, you know, certain people, some people, immediately go to work trying to figure out how to beat it. So, I'm just anticipating that this, a year from now, I will not have received one single application for a garage sale unless we do something to aggressively promote the notion that we are regulating it and why, and you know, encourage people to get an application.
And again, it's just to make a record of the fact that it occurred, so
Right.
that we can keep track. That's all it's for. It doesn't say what they can or can't sell, or how much property they cover doing it, how many people they have, you know. Okay.
How many food trucks are there? You have a food truck at your garage sale? Yeah.
Okay. The next one that I didn't have input for before this meeting was for the for the certificate of occupancy. So just for the record, or so that we know what has to be on it, I pasted in the text from our regulation. But since then, I did get a sample offered to me that looks like this. It's on the screen.
Oh, okay.
Which I threw together before we actually passed the ordinance, so I'm not sure that this conforms to the ordinance. We'll have to double check it.
Surely every city has one, though.
Well, I looked in 6 and none of them were available online,
Really?
which I found odd, but
That is odd.
I couldn't find anything
Maybe they
online to
didn't want
copy.
them forged.
That's what I was thinking, that they didn't want them used for other purposes.
I mean, the only time it has come up here in Holiday Island is if someone is using a federally guaranteed loan of some sort for financing, like if it's a HUD house or a VA loan. Those are the 2 examples we've had so far.
But our current regulation says they are required to ensure that completed structures and the development of the property comply with the provisions of this chapter. So now they are required.
They're required to have a certificate of occupancy, or they're required for the building inspector to complete the inspection?
No, a long time ago, they had to have a certificate of occupancy to get the water turned on.
It says the official will have the responsibility to issue and keep records of those in accordance with these requirements.
Yeah,
It has to be asked for.
We have an inspection sheet that David uses that is checked off as inspections are done to his satisfaction. I don't know, you know.
Who signs the certificate of occupancy, David? Building inspector?
I don't know, you just look on the form. I didn't.
And I would ask David, did he possibly, since you tried to get all the other kinds of forms that Green Forest
The building
used, did
inspector-
they have a certificate of occupancy?
Like Lynn said, I tried to get a checklist of inspection, steps, and I couldn't find one anywhere. I almost went back to where I was at and asked one of the city folks there to send me their copy, but I didn't. So it's hard to
That's
get.
odd.
Yeah, it's hard to get that checklist. Mayor went to Green Springs and made up some form of electrical, plumbing, insulation, and so on, but we never got anything for a certificate of occupancy except for what was up there.
Yeah, I believe that I got that from Mickey Feinfield, from the old days of the planning commission, when they still were doing inspections and providing certificates of occupancy. I think that's basically where I got that.
Have we asked on the Arkansas Municipal League listserv to see if anyone, that's where you can ask other cities if they have such a thing, and could they provide copies? We could ask for inspection checklists and certificate copies.
Yes. The reason why I haven't pursued that with any degree of gusto is because we don't have a licensed building inspector. And it's an evolutionary process for us to try to figure out what that even constitutes, because there is no such thing as
Have we
a
asked
licensed building inspector.
Have we asked other cities on
Yes.
Arkansas Muni League?
Yes. I've talked to all the area building inspectors.
I was
And
suggesting
they-
passing it on the website. You know?
The building inspector derives his authority from the city, not from any state license or anything like that. We hire him to do inspections. And we, as a city, we provide some reassurance that our employee is qualified to make those inspections. And what we are pursuing, and David is pursuing, is getting the necessary certifications to be a licensed plumbing inspector, or a licensed electrical inspector, or a licensed framing inspector, and so on and so on. Put all those together, or as many of them as you can, and you somehow become a licensed building inspector. Now, the difficult one, and I think if you go to a big city like Fayetteville, they don't have a building inspector. They probably have 5 or 6 electrical inspectors. They have 5 or 6 plumbing inspectors. They have 5 or 6 of all the inspectors you need. And they each do their own little thing. In small towns, you try to put it all together under one hat. The difficult one is the electrical inspection, because in order to get an electrical inspector's license, you have to have worked as a journeyman electrician, or a licensed electrician, or under the supervision of a master electrician for 4 years. Regardless of how many tests you can pass, you have to have 4 years of actual work experience. And so to find somebody like that to be your building inspector is practically impossible. So David has the certification that he's taken the class. However, for him to actually get the electrical inspector's license probably isn't going to happen, unless you want to go to work as an electrician for 4 years. So
what he told me was that as long as you've been taking these classes and you can identify problems, then you're okay to do that inspection. My problem is that I don't know enough to identify every problem. I can't look at every box and I can say the major stuff, but I don't have the experience of wiring the house to say this is right.
And so with all of that said, I don't know I don't know what credentialing is required in order to be able to sign a certificate of occupancy and what that means. What happens to that certificate of occupancy?
Well, the city of
What-
Eureka is signing certificates of occupancy.
Because their building inspector, who is short-term, they're looking for a building inspector. He's apparently retiring, but in his career, he worked for the predecessor of Island Airco for 4 years under the supervision of a licensed electrician.
Okay.
And he had his own plumbing business, so he was a licensed plumber. So they lucked out, and he was able to put all the pieces together. And
So are you-
consequently, they called him a licensed building inspector.
Okay, so you're saying they called him a licensed building inspector,
Right.
but it's not official?
There is no such thing
Well,
as a
okay.
licensed
if they
building
can call
inspector.
him a licensed building inspector, why can't we call David a licensed building inspector?
Is there a need to?
Because.
I mean, so he can sign a certificate of occupancy.
Because he doesn't have any of the licenses.
Well, I
that
know he doesn't now. I'm saying at some point.
So how many does he have to have? All of them?
I don't know.
That's what I don't know either.
He told me
I'm
that,
having a hard time
that the
finding
other certifications are rather easy to get. But the electrical one was probably the hardest. I think that's what you told me, David. But,
It's the only one that requires actual work.
what I'm trying to get out of this is, what is our plan?
I don't know what the plan is, and that's why I made the certificate of occupancy optional if they request it. Because I don't know what that document means, and until I know what it means, you
Well,
know,
that's a good point.
Let me help try to answer it through
Yeah.
the regulation that we passed. We're not saying that a licensed building inspector has to sign it. We say the planning and zoning official, whoever that is appointed to be. And then in B, it tells us the procedure. And it says that you're just gonna make sure that the building is built according to our regulations. And then it says, it has a content of what it's gonna have on that document. So maybe the sticking point is we're calling it a certificate of occupancy, we just could call it something else. So it doesn't have that legal authority in its title. Maybe we just need to change the text and call it some other certificate. Final inspection sign-off. Or it's good enough.
Why do cities call it a certificate of occupancy? Anybody know that?
I think it's because the government might ask for something like that. The insurance underwriter or the loan underwriter may ask for that.
But if it's that meaningless, why would they have you do that?
I don't know that it's meaningless.
Well, I think it's in the fire code and some, you can't have a,
Now, that kind of rings a bell, Jerry.
yeah.
I'm not saying it's meaningless. I'm saying I don't understand what the meaning is.
I'm thinking it's saying, we think it's safe enough for you to live in.
Well, we're saying in our regulation that it meets our standards. It says, complies with the provisions of this chapter as well as the site plans or conditional use approvals for such structures and development. And it has to be, we have to give this certificate. It says it shall be or must be applied for and issued by the planning and zoning official prior to occupancy and use of the structure.
And it seems
Any
like,
structure.
and what you said, Jerry, kind of, it sounds like, and maybe Pat could comment on this, it sounds like it might be required to get an insurance certificate.
Maybe 20 years ago, but not recently.
Not
Only thing
recently,
I remember
I
about
think
it,
it's an annual.
on a new structure, if it was just a house recently built? Would they insure it if it didn't have a certificate of occupancy?
I think
would they
so.
wanna
I don't
see it?
know. You're talking about underwriting stuff.
But the way you read that, our standards, but don't our standards cite the
All those
uniform
codes.
code
Yeah.
and what all?
Yeah.
So,
The plumbing and building and electrical, fire.
I'm guessing, and like I said, I don't have a full understanding of it yet. But I'm speculating that cities have certificates of occupancy because they need some kind of a lever. They need some leverage to keep people from moving into a structure that was not built to code.
And may be dangerous to the neighbors.
Or partially completed.
Well, also, when we tackle the VRBO ordinance, I mean, occupancy would be a key part of that too.
Back a long time ago when I was on the VOC, they had to have a certificate of occupancy from the planning commission before they would turn the water on. So, I mean, they did have to.
Yeah, and I think that's where I got my
But I
document from.
I mean, basically what you're saying here, what the document's saying is, the dwelling or building is complete and ready to be fully functional. That's all you're really doing.
Yeah,
Well, I just can't understand why another city wouldn't share their form with us.
Well, I mean, I don't know.
I don't think it's a matter of what the form should look like. I just don't fully understand what the ramifications are of us issuing that form, or maybe not issuing the form. If we refuse to issue a certificate of occupancy and the contractor or the owner takes us to court, then what? We're gonna have to prove that we were qualified to refuse them occupancy, which we probably can't do. We
Oh,
wouldn't
yeah,
refuse to let
you would cite
somebody-
some missing something
Yeah,
that was in the
violates
inspection.
this part of the
course.
Arkansas Fire Prevention Code or something like that, and they refuse to comply. You know,
But then,
it's,
there's no need to have a building inspector if they're not gonna enforce it.
now, well,
Can we ask questions?
sure.
Okay, so like somebody that's building these houses now, what procedure do they go through? Since this stuff hasn't technically taken effect, is that correct?
It has, it's effective last Tuesday.
Yeah, and
All the zoning regulations and it's already taken effect? Okay, well, then you had the public readings and all that kind of stuff, but people that are building houses in Holiday Island right now, or say a month ago, what's their procedure for things like that? What do they have?
David has a form that requires them to notify him when they get to certain stages on footings and foundations and plumbing and electrical and stuff like that. There's several inspections that need to be done at different steps in the process, and we're having some degree of success in being notified on time. However, it's a learning process for everybody to remember to notify David so that he can come and look at the footings before they're poured and stuff like that. But there is a process, an inspection process right now. They pay an inspection fee, and there is a process of doing inspections. And once the inspection is signed off, all the inspections are signed off by David. We would not stand in the way of them, moving into that property, certificate of occupancy or no certificate of occupancy. But at this point, I consider that to be an optional document that we would provide only if requested.
But he does an inspection along the way, I guess, by checklist. And are there times that you tell them that they need to do something different than they're doing?
I mean,
And so in his final inspection, if he determines that they circumvented what he recommended to meet our standards, we're just gonna let them move in?
Well, I guess we haven't come to that point, maybe that's what the certificate of occupancy
Final inspection.
is, you know.
We have a stop work order, and so if he doesn't do that before he covers something, then he can't work anymore until he completes that step of the
I
construction.
mean, there will probably be somebody's gonna take us to court, but, I mean, we can't, in my opinion, we can't just go out there and do a conscientious job, and then they thumb their nose at us.
Well, I don't think that, you know, whether we use a certificate of occupancy or not, the current process wouldn't allow that, because we have the inspection process, and the completed inspection sheet is going to be filed with the building permit to indicate that the project was done and it was all signed off. So, you know, there is a sign-off process right now, and like David said, you know, if they haven't completed the job correctly, we can issue a stop order, and that by itself would prohibit people from moving in until it's rectified. So, I guess I don't have a problem with making with giving people a certificate of occupancy necessarily. I would be much more comfortable if I knew all the ramifications of that document. I can see where it would be a good lever to use, you know, to prevent people from moving into a house that was not built correctly, or commercial property that wasn't completed properly. They wouldn't get a business license if they didn't have a certificate of occupancy.
I think what the original purpose of this certificate of occupancy was to keep people from moving into a half-complete home.
So far, I can tell you from experience, over the last 4 years, there's only 2 times have come up when it was even asked for. One was when somebody was building a HUD house, and the other was just very recently, somebody had a house built and they were getting a VA loan. So in both cases, it was the federal government that was looking for a certificate of occupancy in order to close the financing. In one case, this predated the city, but the old planning commission got the building inspector from Green Forest to come over and provide a certificate of occupancy. In the more recent case, we contacted the finance company and told them that the building permit for the house was issued by a prior planning commission that reported to the developer. They didn't require a building permit. They didn't require a certificate of occupancy. And, you know, since the house wasn't built under the supervision of the city or under the inspection of the city, we would not provide a certificate of occupancy, and they seemed to be okay with that. Because they never got back with me, and the people are, if it would have been a problem, they would have come back to me and said, you know, try again.
How many, do you have a handle on how many cities have an actual certified building inspector?
No.
Quote unquote certified.
Well,
I know Eureka Springs and Green Forest both do. But like I said, they're, you know, when they call themselves licensed building inspectors, it's only because they have all the pieces. There is no such thing as a state license for a building inspector. You can do all the Google searches you want, and it'll be all kinds of home inspections for real estate companies and stuff, but there isn't a thing in there about a building inspector.
Seems like to me, the only thing that's particularly right, say, the building is completed as according to, permit or. And
Well-
so, and his final inspection ought to be the same thing.
I guess I don't have any problem with issuing a certificate of occupancy.
Yeah.
We'll have to change I think the building code actually specifies that a certificate of occupancy is available upon request. But, so we may or may not have to change the building code accordingly, but, and, you know, as far as I'm concerned, that form is just fine, because that's what they did use here years ago. I just take the to be issued upon request off of it.
Should we put to be issued after final inspection?
Well, that's what it says, following structure has been inspected for compliance with the requirements, blah, blah, blah.
I think it looks good. I don't see.
Looks fine to me.
Yeah.
It's just one of those things where I've spent a lot of time trying to figure out what it means to be a licensed building inspector, and best I can come up with is if you have, you know, 3 or 4 pieces of the puzzle, you can call yourself, or the city can call you a licensed building inspector.
The only other suggestion I would make was we could, this residential should probably come off, because in the
Oh,
ordinance,
could be
we
commercial.
say it's use of the structure. So it's any structure, any addition. So it could be a business, it could be a garage.
One minor point, we call him planning official.
Yes,
Uh,
generically.
Say we need to call him planning something.
Well, this is the generic definition of who's appointed by the mayor to do certain activities. So in our certificate, it's the activity of the building inspector, apparently. Is that our city seal that goes on there, the recorder's seal?
Building inspector's got a seal.
You have a seal, okay,
Oh, good.
all right. Makes it official then. Okay. Any more discussion about the forms?
Yeah, I think we should beat it to death a little more.
We should what?
Beat it to death, he said.
It's already there.
All right.
That doesn't mean you stop beating it.
Okay, so there are regulations that we set aside when we went through the ones that we approved and had marked those reserved. And I've captured those titles from the original document that we started with. And the first thing that I think we need to change in a meeting, an official meeting, is the re-outlining of 2804. So 2804, pasted in here. We can make this view a little bit bigger. And this is a problem I discovered when I was trying to do the outlining, that I got sideways with the text, and it has to do with separation between text changes, text amendments, and the process only has these 4 steps in it, A, B, C, and D. And then it goes on in the document and it moves the I reorganized it here with outline of E, that was a sub A, and then all the text below this was part of D. So it really made it, that's how I got confused when I was doing it, trying to follow through. It's really, the rezoning amendments is a separate section, and when I read it from what was there, this is the way it should have been documented. So it's just a change in the way it's outlined. It doesn't change any words or placement. But I think we need to make an official change to make it clearer. So just moving that out and putting the headlines on there, the bolding to help find the different pieces. Okay, then the rest of these sections that we had, I looked at what we had for 7.50 planned unit development districts. That's 6 pages of text about what may or may not happen, probably not inside the city limits of Holiday Island, mainly because parcels are too small, but if someone wanted to develop an area, it would be a planned unit development, and we don't have any we have no language in the current regulations that talk about how those should be handled, how you would expand an area, how you redevelop an area. Well, I'm on the outline, but I'm talking about 7.5, page 5.
Okay.
The text is page 5. No, I did document that process here. So I don't know if we want to tackle that or not, but I did highlight section 15, starting on page 12, non-residential uses. It's a short section. I think we could go through that pretty quick. There's very little to do. And when I read it, I thought, why did we leave it out? Section 12 is, oh man, this cursor. Page 12.
So, man, if we make this change or add this, do we have to have another hearing on it?
Yep. All changes now with the planning and zoning regulations have a hearing process. So we'd have to do the notice in the newspaper to let the public know and have a public hearing for input before we make the change.
If we want to add some of these, then we pick out the ones we want to do them all at once.
That would be my recommendation. Yeah. Because the text is there for the 2804 that we've just gone through. It's just not easy to read. So there's no urgency in doing that, but that'd be my recommendation, to change it all in one meeting, whatever we decide.
Residential accessory uses, how is that different from detached accessory?
Well, in this section, it gives certain permissions. Okay, so what it says is non-residential accessory uses include, and it's talking about the different ways that you can use these accessory buildings on a property. So I was surprised we didn't cover it when we did it initially, because it's a short document or a short section. That's it.
I thought I remember talking about accessory buildings.
We only talked about what size and where they can be positioned.
Right.
And in terms of being on residential properties.
Yeah.
I would say if we're going to do that one, we need to do that.
Well, I guess what my purpose for today was to say which ones we want to work on. So I'd recommend we work on this one. The wrecking salvage in section 1603 on page 12, the salvage yards, they're only permitted in industrial major districts. We don't have any of that right now, so I don't think it's an issue for right now.
We got one outdoor food vendor, but
The outdoor food vendors on page 13. It does a lot of coverage on it. I don't think it's a.
I think we got more issues with outdoor storage.
Yeah, I didn't have it on my list to recommend. Not to recommend, not to work on 1609. That was my recommendation, not to work on it.
Not highest priority.
Yeah. On page 15, the detached accessory units. There are pieces of that I think are of interest to us. Section H and section J. H is about deed restriction text that you might put on a accessory dwelling that you might, well, if we looked at H, it'd probably be easier. So that starts on page 15. H says the deed restrictions before obtaining a building permit, an accessory dwelling unit, for an accessory dwelling unit. The property shall file the circuit clerk a declaration of restrictions containing a reference to the deed under which the property was acquired. The concern that I have with doing that is we don't allow accessory dwelling units. So this is talking about that,
Yeah.
but that language that's there about deed restrictions might help us deal with that question of, I want to build a garage on the lot that I own next to me. That one of the solutions, because the problem that we've always come back with,
Oh, yeah.
we don't want that property sold separately. We want it under control of that house property. That maybe a deed restriction would be a way to solve that problem. That lot cannot be sold separate from this lot. That's a deed restriction. If we wanted to go there and permit that.
I really like that idea. I think it needs to be thought through so that we don't inadvertently create a firestorm. But there is so much
That's all the problem.
interest and demand in doing that. And it would put so many lots to good use that are just forevermore going to be vacant lots otherwise.
And in our process, we could say it would be an improvement, an approved lot, so that would help ice it into assessments. I mean, it'd be the cost. If I want to build a garage on my lot, my assessment's going to change. But
So in
that's
other
what
words, you'd be paying the improved.
Right. Even though it may not have water service to it, but it would be improved in our language.
It's such a major issue to us that I think it needs to be its own section.
Okay. Well,
It needs to stand out instead of being buried in the text, covering a lot of trivial things.
sure.
But
I just saw it as a solution.
Mm-hmm.
I had a lengthy discussion with a gentleman this morning about that very issue, and it's a big thing. It's a big deal. But I think that when we draft that section of the code, we want to definitely define how we're going to tie those two properties together forever with deed restrictions. I think we also need to consider some, and maybe our zoning ordinance, our zoning change ordinance covers it already, but I think there needs to be some sort of buy-in from the neighbors, that's going to be okay.
Sure.
So,
Be part of the process of,
Yeah.
of getting that deed restriction applied for, or getting that. Well, wouldn't it be a conditional use? Because the zoning R1, R2 says you have to put a primary residence on this lot. So I want to use it differently. So that's a conditional use application.
Yeah.
And go through that. And
they
so one of the
have to go through
conditions of
hearing process.
And one of the conditions of approving it is deed restriction and approval from the neighbors and.
Yeah.
Okay,
I think that,
Also, you were talking about a garage, which is not a dwelling unit, though.
right, that's what I said
what
there.
we're talking about, yeah.
It's
This
guidance
section
for,
is for dwelling units.
right, but it's guidance for what
But it's guidance, yes.
what the text should look like.
Mhm.
Yeah, I think that, this has got to be well thought out before we start allowing it, because in addition to buy-in from the neighboring property owners, there probably needs to be some specific language about what that accessory building can be used for, like storing vehicles or something like that, but not, running a microbrewery or something.
Oh, wait a minute. Let's not get
Bad example.
Sounded good in the past.
But it makes it a lot more reasonable to accept that kind of detached dwelling
Yeah.
if it
Well,
has to
then-
be attached to
Yeah,
the
and the
other
other-
property.
The other thought I had is that the construction of that vehicle needs to mimic the house that it's being attached to, or the property that it's being attached to. In other words,
Similar construction.
Compatible
yeah,
in architecture and
it
color.
can't stick out like a sore thumb in the neighborhood because it looks like a monstrosity.
We don't want a big tin building,
Yeah.
but that'd be part of our conditions. Then I found this section, or this paragraph J, I thought it was interesting that if you have signed a property covenant prohibiting, and this is a dwelling unit, but you cannot build one. A homeowners association may have rules against the construction and or rentals of such buildings. You must follow their rules, whether or not your property meets all of the requirements. Be sure to check with your homeowner association before proceeding with plans. This language defends HOA agreements in their ordinances. And it's fairly recent, it's 2019 when they did it. We don't have anything like that, but we have the paragraph at the very beginning that says we're going to do the best we can in these ordinances to mirror and support, I think that's a word, for what the declarations have in them. But they're advising folks that if it violates your HOA agreement, you can't do it.
Well, we basically tell people that when we're issuing building permits.
Right.
That, what you're asking to do might not violate a city ordinance, but it violates your unit covenant, and we are not going to issue a building permit, knowingly violating the unit covenant, because the unit covenant came first.
There's gonna be some confusion if we do something like that in the homeowners association. I mean, that's usually talking about condo units.
Right,
Yeah.
right. But it's in the vein of what our declarations does. It's an agreement between me and my neighbors in my unit.
Yeah, we would have to change the
Right.
terminology.
When I saw that, I go, wow.
Although there are condo associations in Howard Haven that have, in addition to the unit covenants of the unit that they're in, they have their own HOA covenants.
Right. Okay. Outdoor storage in page 16, I thought would be.
So as far as priorities
Yeah.
go and what the city really needs, I would put this close to the top.
Yeah.
Because we have people asking about that
Sure.
all the time.
Okay. I thought section 16, outdoor storage would be something we should consider.
Yeah.
Because it talks, this is a copy, I haven't made any revisions, so the zones are there, are not necessarily ours, but it talks about how to protect the neighbors if you're going to do something with outdoor storage. Whether you're going to protect the views with vegetation or physical barriers or fences or berms. So when a commercial property is abutting a residential property, and that commercial property has outdoor storage of whatever manner and shape and form it is, I think we need to consider what they need to be doing to protect the residential neighborhood that's next door to it, or adjacent, or across the street. Okay? In signs, and starting on page 17, I thought maybe the 182 and the 183 were authorized in every district, and certain signs are permitted. There's language in there in 182, 183, and 185 I thought might be something we would adopt, at least in the beginning, because this sign ordinance is very, very thorough.
Yeah.
It covers every kind of sign you can imagine and where they can be placed and how big they can be, and
Probably more thorough than what we need.
yeah,
The pictures were helpful.
yes. So 182 is signs are authorized by district. There's some language there I think that we could probably use, modified to fit us. 183, this is talking about where they're required and public safety and construction signs. Rather than saying no signs are permitted, you got to say which ones are. So that's why I thought there'd be good language in there. It's long.
What does it say about political signs?
I don't recall.
There are temporaries, there's a category called temporary sign.
Okay. Temporary signs from December to January. That's for decoration. There's limitations here about clutter. You know, to answer your question, I didn't dig into it.
Well, if it doesn't, which it probably does, we need to, I mean, it hadn't really been a problem, but the size, some of those are really gigantic there at the corner of 23 and Holiday Island Drive. Was in that art area. Yeah. Yeah, and then the other thing is, and it hadn't been an issue, but it ought to be addressed in some ordinance, is that they need to be, can only remain out. They need to be taken up 2 days or 3 days after the election, or 7 days or whatever, and can't be put up, 4 months before the election. Oh.
Yeah, something to that effect needs to be in there for all temporary signage, because, people put up rummage sale signs, and 3 weeks later, it's sitting there in the rain yet, well, not in the rain, not anymore, but we don't get it.
And, with May or March, whatever primaries, I mean, there are people in the county that have had signs up since February.
So again,
And I would be, I don't want to go overboard on controlling permanent commercial signage, but I think I wouldn't mind seeing something in there about homemade temporary signs that businesses put up. Just doesn't make for a very professional looking commercial area when you have, signs made out of 4x4 A-frames, sitting out in the median by the road and stuff.
so there may be text also in the enforcement 185 that we could use. That if we're going to put a regulation on, we need to probably have this section. Okay. On page 42, the landscaping, screening, fencing, buffering of new development kind of ties into the one at the top that we're not going to cover, 7.5, but there is some language in there that may be useful to us to, I skipped one, off-street parking and loading. I thought maybe we'd look at that, because it talks about commercial spaces and how much, someone's going to have a commercial space of 3,000 square feet, you have to have a certain number of parking spaces. Because we have areas in the commercial area that are being developed. And we don't have an answer or a control, or at least input. Don't even have an input on the plan. Not by ordinance anyhow.
I don't know whether you caught this, but on page 20, there's some more language about temporary signs.
Okay.
In terms of real estate signs.
Okay.
And election signs.
All right. On page 42, landscaping. So obviously the community of Town has a lot more going on than we do.
Although there are only 4,300 people.
I know, but they're a sub part of the metropolis, Northwest. I thought there might be language in 2103 that we consider, because it talks about the purpose is to ensure the minimum of open space and green area for new developments.
How do you describe new development?
It's a bare ground and somebody's going to develop it with whatever.
we're very lacking in that area.
We don't have a lot of real estate for it.
Yeah, I'm not sure this is a high priority one for us right now.
Okay, we got plenty to work on, or we do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, I'll take that off the list to consider. And I don't know if flood control is something we need to do. I would, if we don't have any ordinances or protection in flood control and a flood happens and property's damaged, I don't know what we'll have ability to ask for the government for help if we don't have a control plan. I don't know the answers to those questions.
We do have a hazard. What is it? I should know exactly what it's called, but remember when the lady from Harrison came over here and presented us with
Yes.
a hazard?
Yeah.
It's not hazard, emergency response manual. And it does cover flooding in there.
But I think the purpose for that is that we committed to join the group, and we're committed to working on it. So this is part of what we have to do to work on it.
Yes, except that there was no property in the, in Holiday Island that fell into the
Oh, okay.
floodplain.
Okay, so if the lake goes much higher, it's still not a problem. The Corps won't raise it to a certain level to flood properties?
It went up to 935 and it didn't.
Yeah.
Okay, all right, I can scratch it.
The dam in Branson will, you know,
We'll overtop that.
the top of the dam is about as high as you can, as deep as you can get on this end.
Okay, all right. Okay. And I don't, you know, they have an appendix in there for flags, because flags are mentioned in the document. It's just from the flag code. I don't know that we need to put it in ours, but there is a flag code. And the concern that I had with that was, we as Rotarians in our program put out flags that are, I don't know, they're left overnight, and we're not following the flag code that they're supposed to be left.
We leave them out in the rain, we don't have.
Yeah.
it,
So, don't know that it's necessary. And this regulation on planting and screening and whatever has all this stuff about all the different kinds of trees you can plant in this community and which ones you don't. So, it's huge. I scratched it. Okay, so coming to the end of the list, we highlighted several we thought we might consider. Who's going to volunteer to work on it instead of Lynn Dumas?
Now is when everybody gets interested in their shoes.
Go over the ones we checked.
The number one, we're going to work on a guidance or writing regulation to permit garages only on adjoining lots. To do the research and,
That would be a conflict of interest for me to do it, because I'm gonna be the first one to apply.
well, then give you a good candidate.
Yeah, I think so.
Well, what, is that page 12 or page 9? Or is that a new section?
I noticed it as a solution to our problem in page 15, section H, where it talked about deed restriction.
Okay, it's something we've already done.
No, we haven't done it, but the text that's in 16.40, paragraph H,
Okay, that was my question.
yeah, 1640, paragraph H has some language that I thought might help us. Along with what Dan and others have said, that during a conditional use hearing, that certain conditions would be applied to it, and what they might look like, what that text would look like.
Is this stuff, what is this stuff? Is it existing, it's not in there existing.
No, it's in this reserve text.
How quick does it have to be done?
Well, in my mind, the sooner the better. Because like Dan said, people are coming to you asking for it.
Well, they've been doing that for a long time. The answer is no.
I'll give it a shot.
But I think you gotta respond to what, as Dan said, several people want to do that.
It's definitely something that.
Well, the whole purpose of that
Yeah, I'm,
was to keep people from
I'd like to take care of that too, so.
Yeah. So Linda said she'll work on a draft for that.
Yeah, but it prohibit dwellings. And some uses of garages.
Or that guy down there built.
Okay, there's a section of outdoor storage, that there's words in there or things that we might consider and add.
You want me to do that?
If you want to volunteer to work on a draft, that'd be terrific. All right, we'll put Ken on looking at 16.60 and picking out text.
Now, that section is not about people parking a boat in the driveway.
No.
That section is about,
I know what it is.
okay,
Okay. Anything,
You wanted it yourself, is that it?
no, I just want to make sure that,
Do we not have one that prohibits parking a boat in the driveway?
we do not have that restriction.
That's it, that would be in your nuisance.
I don't think the law would technically allow us to make that restriction. Unless it
I
impacted,
disagree.
you know, safety, security, or something like that.
Someone want to take the sections of signs to look at what we might do about what are authorized and which ones are permitted and the enforcement pieces?
I'll do that.
All right.
What's the number?
It's section 18, and I was taking guidance from the .182, .183, .185, and Linda said there were some notes on page 20 of this document that
Or
has
21,
about
20 or
20,
21,
21 about the temporary signs.
and election signs too.
Yeah. So the last one that we talked about maybe considering was off-street parking and loading. Pat, you're last.
I'm gonna be, yeah. I'll get my computer to work.
Here, I've got a few.
No, I don't mean right now.
Is that off-street parking and loading in, you know, commercial areas or?
Both,
Might have to look,
you have to be both.
page 36.
Should be both.
It's section 21.01, off-street parking and loading. It starts on page 36 of this document, this work document. And Pat, you may come out with, you know, this doesn't really apply to anything we've got, you know, we don't need it to cover what we have.
I'll take a look at it.
Yeah,
I have a brand new laptop, it's not working very well. Well, you can't do it on that. I tell me.
Matt.
so it says it applies to new development or any existing development that is altered in a way that enlarges or increases capacity by adding or creating dwelling, guest rooms, floor areas, or seats. That's what it applies to. So anything that's, so what came to my mind, and it's not a dig, but when the farmhouse decided to build a giant deck and make additional seating, that was an expansion of that property, and parking has become an issue. So that would be the example in real life where this would be applicable. And part of the concern when I read this was those cars that are parked right in front of the place are too close to the street, according to
That's
this.
true.
They're too close to the street according to the text that's in here.
But he owns a bunch of property.
I know.
Around the side, so.
But I'm just saying, this text, the language in here would have been applicable to that situation. So if that happens again, if we don't have any ordinance, then we don't have any input. So that's section 21 for Pat then. Terrific. Only one we didn't do was non-residential accessory uses in chapter 12. On page 12 rather, section 15. I'll put my name on that.
And that would be like mostly commercial, where they have
Yeah.
accessory buildings
Yeah, it's-
on their property.
The extra building, what can you use it for? That's what and like I said, when I read that, I thought, why didn't we approve this when we did it originally? Because it fits right in, we just set it aside. Okay, so I've got other notes on other things to work on too. That's all I have, Mr. Mayor. Mr.
Okay.
Chairman.
This isn't necessarily an agenda item, but I thought it would be a good time to talk about it. Not necessarily solve the problem in today's meeting, but at least get us thinking about what the solution is. Real life situation, we had a piece of property up in the park. It was a unit. Over time, Tom sold it to somebody. I think it's changed hands a couple of times. And possibly the current owner subdivided it into two parcels or two plots to the fact that they are now plotted. One has a street address, one does not. One just has a unit block lot designation. And somebody recently purchased one of the two lots. And either they recently purchased it or they're getting ready to purchase it, because I see the realtor sign still up there yet. And they are asking what, they want to build something, and they're asking what the restrictions are for that lot. Well, had there been a covenant written for that lot, we would have picked out all of the information from that. Is it commercial? Is it, what are the setbacks? What are the restrictions? What are the easements and all of that? But there was never a covenant written for that property before it was sold by the developer. And so now, when we're looking for answers for this prospective builder, we have no answers for them. So,
Well, is it zoned? We
Yeah,
rezoned
That
that.
should be zoned.
And didn't we assign whatever restrictions were neighboring property to that property when we zoned?
Our ordinance says that the parcel will have the same zoning as the neighboring lots.
in commercial areas,
It says in adjoining lots. It doesn't specify commercial, residential, industrial.
because I couldn't really find that.
Is it in our UBL table?
It should be.
The table is just empty boxes.
Oh, okay. Because it's
For
a
that
new
unit.
unit number?
It's not a new unit number, but there was never a covenant written for it.
Well, is it on the HICID list of lots? I mean, is it assessed in HICID?
I don't know.
If it's assessed in HICID, it's
I
in
don't
the
know, but
UBL
it's on
table.
Data Scout with, property information.
Well, if it's within our boundary and it
I
was
was
sold
gonna
as
say,
a lot,
if it's in a zone boundary, then
gotta have a unit block lot.
There's that whole park up there.
Or parcel
Yes.
number at least.
There was no planning in that park up there.
I'll give you that, but
It was a series of afterthoughts. Oh, we can, I got a buyer that wants to do this, so, we'll do this.
well, now if it was just recently subdivided, it may not have an assignment with HICID. I don't know.
what's the process for them to do that? Get that replat?
Well, before we existed, they just replatted it and took it over to the county and registered it with the clerk. And that was it. Now they have to come before the planning commission.
At what point did they do that? Did they do this years ago or recently?
Um,
We've been in existence 2 years.
but we didn't have our zoning ordinance until a couple days ago. Um,
Do you have a parcel number? We could look it up.
that's what I'm just
Okay.
gonna look at, if I'm, like, have enough. Internet capability here.
Exactly. Okay.
Okay, take the scout. I can tell you where, it's the property right behind Miss Kitty's.
Well, okay.
That's another issue, of what a business is allowed to display.
Outdoor storage.
That looks like a flea market. It does.
Well, it is.
I know, but you ought to be required to take it inside.
Okay. It is the big,
Table up on the screen.
the one that's in question right now
It's up on the screen.
has a street address of 3 Park Cliff Drive, and in the Data Scout legal description.
Okay.
However, the property doesn't front Park Cliff Drive.
Mm.
The property fronts Park Drive.
Okay,
How does it have access? What access to a street does it have?
It used to have
That alley
access,
between,
it used to have access to Park Cliff Drive by going through the parking lot between what used to be Miss Kitty's and, maybe what used to be the restaurant there. You know, you used to go through this parking lot down to this cul-de-sac, and then you had access to this. 320
it's 320.
320
07100 -001.
Okay.
That's the parcel ID.
There should be a legal.
It's unit 219,
Okay.
block 1, lot 1C.
219-1-1C. See if it's in the table.
And it used to
On the
be,
screen.
part of,
Oh. 219,
C2.
1, I see 1 and 1A.
That's because there's only one parcel in unit 219 when we drafted this list.
Oh,
It's
okay.
zone C2.
But it would be C2 then.
Yes, sir. Yes,
Yeah.
ma'am.
That's the out, right there.
So the restrictions are what C2 has in our ordinance.
say, if somebody, if the owner would have come to us, to the planning commission before they subdivided, well, I guess technically, they still have
Yeah.
the corner of that driveway to the cul-de-sac still fronts a little corner of that lot. So if that driveway between the buildings is an extension of Park Cliff Drive, then I guess you could theorize that 3 Park Cliff Drive is an okay street address, but typically you wouldn't have to go through a parking lot. You know, that property should have had a Park Drive street address. And if the planning commission would have had a chance to look at this, they would have made that recommendation or determination.
So what's the resolution? Can you?
Well, they want to know what are the setbacks, what are the easements, and things like that. And you know, we have a blank, I have a blank piece of paper on that, unless somebody knows where I can find that.
Dan, it's in our UBL table, unit 219, parcel A is C2. So
And the
zoning-
table is on,
It's zone
It-
C2. Yeah, I already told him that it's zone commercial,
Okay,
so they can build what they want to build, but he wants to know, you know, how far back from the street do I have to be,
okay.
and, you know, are there any easements?
Is it inside the gate or outside the gate? The wall.
This, what wall?
Is there a wall around?
This parcel, or this lot, is between the brick wall that encapsulates the bluffs and Miss Kitty's.
He's between Miss Kitty's and the wall.
Yeah, it's between the back side of Miss
Miss
Kitty's
and the wall.
and the brick wall.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay. All right, so the information is there.
Yep.
Seven dot oh two, 702.
yeah, 707-20. It's page, I have
20.
page 56 of
Okay, I
this
got it.
edition.
I've got it, so 7
It's right at
on
the end.
screen, yeah.
Is that same information then supposed to be on that big?
It's in our ordinance, it's the end of the ordinance.
We passed the ordinance.
But we have this humongously long table
Yes.
of everything, of all the units and everything.
219 is in the table with the other
219 is at the
property
end.
in 219. And they would assume whatever that other property is.
It's in the ordinance 22-6.
So what did I do? I just deleted my shortcut, now I have to remember to go and find it. So we didn't post the ordinance on.
Yeah, we need to put it into that list of active ordinances.
I don't. I'm sure we're.
You want to read it the way it is? You can.
It was under the pending
Yeah, she's got a link on the pending page.
ordinances. It's under governance too. I just haven't posted the stuff since last week.
And I sent you the one that has their signature on the map. So that'd be the one you post, because and then it has the second Tuesday update done in it. So Dan, you're looking for those setbacks, that's approximately on page 48 or 49 of that document. That's the table. You'll find the 219 at the bottom, near the bottom.
And what I was looking at, that looked like a blank page to me.
It's up there on the screen.
No, I'm trying to find what I was
Oh,
looking.
you were
at.
looking at this table 7-02,
Yeah,
and that was residential districts. You were looking at 7-02 table probably.
Yeah, I was looking at that too. Oh, is that,
That's titled for residential. And then 7-20 down below it is commercial. Scroll on down.
so that's what the NA stands for, that doesn't, the table doesn't apply to that unit?
No, there's no detail available, there's no covenant.
Yeah, and I guess that's why if I'm sufficiently confused, I wonder if other people would be.
Sure.
You bet.
We have a table here with that unit number
Right, but it's
and
titled,
no information.
it's titled residential
Yeah,
district. How can I make it clear? We'll put on the list to change.
If it's on this table, if the unit is on this table, if it's not a residential unit, maybe it shouldn't be on this table.
Unit 219 was undefined, it's a parcel. What table should I put it on?
Why do you say it's a parcel?
In
As a unit
in the
number.
UBL table, it's a parcel. When we drafted this and passed it, it was a parcel.
It's in the UBL table.
As a parcel.
Yeah.
I'll give you-
What page did you say that the actual table is on that has the information?
It's 7-20, it's right below the one we're looking at. Page 48 or 49, parcel A.
Oh, I was looking at it. Was I looking at it? Yeah. 21901A.
It's a parcel.
Yeah, there's still, it's in the table
Right,
still.
as a
and it's-
parcel.
And it is defined.
Mhm.
Who cares if it's a parcel? It'll still be C2 even if it gets subdivided.
Right.
So. Yeah, it is a parcel there.
But his comment was, it was on that list of residentials and suggested that if it's a non-residential, it shouldn't be on that table at all.
No, the table includes
No,
residential.
we're talking about the setbacks table, the appendix,
Well, there are two
7-2.
tables. There are two tables, one for commercial and one for residential.
Right. But what tells me, if I'm an outsider, what tells me that 219 is commercial?
UBL table, it says C1,
C2.
The UBL.
C2.
Yeah.
So I need to know to go to the UBL table.
Yes,
That'd
that,
be the
that
first
tells you
place-
your zoning
that'd be the
immediately.
first
That
place
is what
to
you
go.
do.
Okay.
Tell you how it's zoned.
So where's the hint when you go to this, when you go to the ordinance and you're looking for information, where's the hint that you start with the UBL table? Where's the user guide that says, start with the UBL
My
table?
user guide is Ask Lynn.
Yeah, I'm not trying to be a smart aleck about
I
it.
know.
I'm just saying
To
that
make our documents clear to everybody.
if, I've been up to my eyeballs in this for 2 years now, and I got confused.
If
So
you
how
heard-
can I tell somebody that's calling from New York
If
how
you
to
heard,
find their information?
if you heard my first question, when we started going through these forms, my first question was, where do I find the current zoning? Which was on the first form. And Lynn says, well, go to the UBL table, which made perfect sense once he said that.
I mean,
Yeah, because
it's on.
Well, the very first paragraph of our ordinance, section 101, says, it consists of text which follows as well as the zoning district map entitled the map, and the UBL zoning map table, and the map itself. So I don't know what kind of hint I need to give in there,
You
but
could add a comment at the bottom of the form or at the top of the form. To find current zoning, go to or UBL table, and we could cut that out and make it a separate CPC document. Because I noticed it's not by itself as a document,
no, it's part of the ordinance.
but you have to scroll through the whole goddamn ordinance before you get to it.
I have it as a separate document. I pasted it all together because the requirements of making an ordinance, it all has to be one document.
Right, exactly.
Okay.
So why couldn't it be a document posted separately?
It can be.
Because we got the maps posted separately, right?
We do.
Yeah.
We do.
So I think that would help people if you could go there rather than have to scan through the ordinance to find it.
Sure.
So that's,
And it's searchable.
that's a thought.
It's searchable, it's not scanned.
Oh, good.
So you can type
Excellent.
in,
Find
you
this
can
unit.
put in 32 Quail Run Drive, boom, it'll take you right to it.
There you go.
It just seems to me, and this is just
To do it.
just spitballing here,
Mhm.
but it seems to me that, we have a residential table that has all the information on it for residential units. But we also have non-residential units with no data.
Mhm.
Then we have a table for commercial, for non-residential lots, but no unit numbers in that table. So if I'm an outsider, it would be very, very difficult for me to tie those together. To look at one table that's got the number I'm looking for, but no data, and then another table that's got a lot of data, but I don't know if it applies to the unit I'm looking at or not. So it's just something I think we might need to make a little more user-friendly.
If you can answer the guy that posted the inquiry, me too. I mean, you can respond to the guy that asked what he could do, whatever, go out and see too. I mean, that shouldn't prohibit you from.
No, I can tell the guy,
Yeah.
now that you've helped me figure this out, I can tell the guy what he needs to know,
I
but,
mean, there might, Lynn could maybe write some kind of just user guide, if you're looking for this or that, go to sections, something.
I'm, David more so than I now. I mean, we get these calls practically every day. I'm looking at this lot, what's it zoned and, what are the setbacks and yada, yada, yada. If we just had one document, just one table that we could look at that had everything we needed to know.
Well, I think if you take that UBL table that has the zones for each unit block lot, which combines commercial and residential, put that in there as a document. And then if you took out these two appendixes, 702, for residential and non-residential setbacks and other restrictions, that's all you need to look at. You wouldn't have to go through this whole document. I mean, do you agree with that?
Well, if the question is, what can I do in it, you need to read the regulation, and it starts in 703 about commercial, and then look at the tables of what kind of uses. I mean, there's lots of answers to a simple question of what can I do with it.
Well, that's the uses,
Right.
conditional uses and all that.
And then how can I use it? Where can I place my building? That's a separate question, and that's answered by another piece of the document.
That's right. It's all in different places.
Maybe what you need is a table of contents that points you to certain sections, so you can look up a subject and.
That's
turn to
what
the
I
same
was
page.
suggesting, to do something like that.
Yeah.
Or just, and include point out if it's searchable. You know,
And then it easier.
well, it wasn't meant to be easy. I mean, it's to be-
And then the other bit of information about this particular, interested party was that, we think that he wants to build a 13,000 square foot, what did we end up calling it?
Covered patio.
Just, like a pole barn without any walls. It's just a 13,000 square foot roof over a pad for people to park RVs and stuff on it.
An open covered structure.
No,
And I was hard pressed finding anything that defined, that where we even ever considered a structure like that.
You know, there's nothing in these that talk about that kind of a structure.
I mean, what about the Wolf Wellness, that outdoor facility?
The little pavilion,
Pavilion, well, how was that approved? What was
That was-
It
that was
without a
pre-city.
building permit before the city was even involved.
in the wild, wild west. When Tom did whatever Tom wanted.
I mean,
Well, I think now that I know where to get the information, I have enough information, I can call this guy back. But, and David and I will work on coming up with a user-friendly, Reader's Digest condensed version of this ordinance, because for the number of calls we get and the fact that we may not be sitting in front of our computer, and if I tell somebody, go to our website and look at this document, I'm still gonna get a lot of telephone calls, because I think they would have a hard, if I can't find the information. I think any outsider would have difficulty trying to answer their own questions.
should we review some of the building codes you, permits you approved before they came on board?
They're all residential. And our records are an open book. You can look at them when you want. It's a very detailed document, and most people aren't interested in, digging through all of that information to come up with the answers to 2 or 3 questions. And they would just appreciate somebody giving them the answers.
why don't we just table that thought, and maybe we can come up with something that makes it easier if we think about it for a while.
Yeah.
So Dan, with this table that, I'll give it to Linda, that she can post it, it's a searchable PDF, so you can pull up your document and hit the search button, and you can type in 32 Quail, that's my home address, and hit the search button, and it'll take you to it. So it tells me I'm in Unit 17, Block 2, Lot 29, and Zone Residential 1.
Yeah, what it was zoned wasn't the issue.
Okay. All right.
Finding the setback and easement information was the issue. And I guess, admittedly, I got to that first table and I scrolled all the way down and I found the unit number I was looking for, and there was no information there. So my next assumption was there is no information, or it would have been in the table.
I worry if we added that level of information to this table, it's immediately out of date the next time you change the setbacks.
Well, that's,
So getting it to where it's dynamic and, you know, self-updates and stuff, that's kind of tricky.
Well, and legally, we can't just change it and update it. We have to
That's
have a
right.
hearing and the whole 9 yards.
So I think the people like you and the building inspector need to become intimately familiar with this stuff to answer questions.
yeah, I don't argue that.
Not a easy document, I guess.
No, it isn't.
And Dan, regarding
So much
the
in there.
the illustration of this problem that you're facing today, if you took a parcel and subdivided it into 2 lots, at the top of the UBL, it says new UBL requires city planning commission pre-approval of plans. So that's your guidance, that it has to come to the planning commission for what they want to do.
Yeah,
Because it's new.
and, I don't have, I hope that the county is totally up to speed now with what's going on in Holiday Island, that they don't accept a replotting from any Tom, Dick, and Harry that walks in there and just say, well, you know, this must be, you know, like the good old days when Tom used to just do it. You know, that they forget that we have a planning commission now, and they're not supposed to accept any replotting that doesn't have the stamp of approval from the planning commission.
So who is that, the county clerk that's up there in the office in Eureka, where they take it, or is it the county clerk over in Berryville, or could it be both?
I'm gonna let Lynn answer that.
I think it's the Western District in Eureka where our property is filed. We're West River. So our documents are all in Eureka.
And are they an
We
arm of
passed-
the county clerk?
Excuse me?
Are they an arm of the county clerk?
They're in a different office, yes.
But it's a different office?
Yes.
So have we strongly communicated to Connie Doss what they are to do now?
When we adopted our maps, we, meaning Lincoln, hopefully, or Wes,
West filed them with the clerk.
filed them with the clerk.
But
And that
just
should have
means-
been their
That just means
clue.
handing them and them stamping it. It
That
doesn't
should have
mean
been their clue.
anything went in here.
That now they can't just accept a replotting from somebody.
No, I think we need to write a letter
Obviously,
to
they
Connie
have.
Doss.
But I don't know how long ago
Oh.
this was subdivided.
Okay.
It'd be interesting to know.
Could I suggest that we write a letter from you to Connie Doss?
Wes.
Being specific that,
Yeah.
that this is the current situation and they need to get control of it for us.
Because I know that historically they've had a strained relationship with Holiday Island as far as being informed about replotting and stuff like that. You know, stuff would get replotted out here and on, you know, the developer's map, but the deeds might not have been filed with the county and stuff like that, and, or it, you know, was way after the fact and playing catch up and stuff. And, I know when Lawrence was here, he spent a lot of time with the assessor, going through Data Scout and making sure that all the properties were properly identified in Data Scout, and, you know, so that the district was getting assessment money, the county was getting tax money and everything. And there was a lot of cleanup that had to be done.
And regarding the address that's been assigned, we know from history that the 911 coordinator, the assessor, can change those. So when they bring their plans to the commission, then that'll be one of the conditions. It has to have a different address.
But I would just bet that they still don't have any instruction to stop those,
Possible.
likely.
Okay, that's the end of the agenda for today, right?
Yes, that's all I have.
We want to do revisions by our next meeting.
That would give us,
Volunteered for, you want something at our next meeting.
that would be ideal, that a month from now, we'd have something to consider, it would be planning commission work. So that, we need to know what, we'll put on the agenda, at least the Wednesday before the meeting, so we can do our publication, so I can do for planning commission public notice, and put the agenda together, so.
I'll try to have mine because I'm not going to be very mobile.
Sure. So basically, the first Wednesday of November would be your deadline.
It might be a little fuzzy depending on the painkillers.
Yeah, I'm starting this week, the day of the surgery.
That would be the 2nd. That would be November 2nd is the first Wednesday.
That'd be our agenda deadline.
All right. Any comments from anybody? Motion to adjourn? Made the motion. Jerry made the motion to adjourn. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Linda seconded it. Any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? We're adjourned.
Thank you.
Yeah.